If there's one thing I know about middle schoolers, it's that they love themselves some Shakespeare, almost as much as they love going to the dentist. And imagine their surprise and delight when you bring up the sonnets, because for a second they thought you said Sonic and you're going to talk about video games. So imagine their heartbreak when you dash their hopes and dreams on the harsh rocks of reality and they realize you're talking about poetry, not hedgehogs. But maybe there's a way to make the sonnets a little less painful than a root canal. Stick with me and let's talk about how. Hi, and welcome to Classroom Confidential and a Fool's Guide to Shakespeare. Now, once again, we're not talking about teaching Shakespeare to fools. No, we would never dream of calling middle schoolers or high schools or any children fools. Now, would we? No, we are talking about ourselves being the fools who are teaching it. And by fools, we don't mean goons, we don't mean goofy clown type people, we mean entertainers, because quite frankly, the only way that Shakespeare ought to be experienced is heard and seen and breathing and alive. And there's absolutely no way you're going to get kids to pay attention to Shakespeare if you're just having them read words off a page. So we need to do whatever we can to keep their attention and make Shakespeare the entertainment it was designed to be. To be or not to be is not how any of Shakespeare's sonnets begin. And that's why we start with them, because they are small, they are self-contained, and when it comes to teaching Shakespeare to middle schoolers and high schoolers, they're not nearly as threatening as something like Hamlet, for crying out loud. Now, one of the first hurdles we have to overcome is getting students to embrace the language, because especially when they have had no experience with Shakespeare, they have preconceived notions that it's old-fashioned and dusty and outdated and has no relevance to their lives today. And so by starting with something like the sonnets, which are small and self-contained and manageable and not as threatening as an entire play, we show them that the language can be accessible and it's not nearly as difficult to understand as they first imagined. So I always begin with Sonnet 18, which is not only one of Shakespeare's most famous sonnets, I also think it's one of the most accessible. It's not that hard to understand. It stands apart, stands on its own from the other sonnets without reliance on them. And as we go through it line by line with a little close reading, students realize that, hey, maybe they can actually understand poetry, believe it or not. And it starts on line 1 with a question. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Wow, what a hook, what an attention grabber. And it can lead into a discussion about whether or not your students would ever want to be compared to a summer's day. Because I think most people's reaction to the idea of a summer's day is, oh gosh, what a lovely thing. But then on the very next line, Shakespeare turns the tables and says, on second thought, thou art more lovely and more temperate. So the question Shakespeare is asked in the very first line, he immediately begins to answer in the next line by saying, actually, you're more beautiful, you're more lovely than a summer's day, and more temperate, more well-tempered, more evenly balanced. You're not too hot, you're not one of those cold, dreary summer days, you're right in the middle. You are absolutely more perfect than the majority of summer days ever are. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May. And you can ask your students, what are darling buds? Maybe some of them say, are they buds of yours that are darling? But others might actually guess that they're flowers, which indeed they are. Rough winds do shake the flowers, the beauty of spring. Rough winds destroy the flowers, which are symbolic of the beauty and the new life that spring has created. So sometimes summer is too harsh. Sometimes summer actually destroys the beautiful things in the world. And summer's lease hath all too short a date. Great time for a vocab word. What does lease mean? And eventually they're going to come up with something that only lasts a short period of time, something that you rent. Summer is too short. Summer will come to an end. So the question that Shakespeare has asked in the very first line has now been answered in the 3 lines following, that, hey, maybe summer is not such a great thing to compare you to, because as far as I'm concerned, you're much, much better than summer overall. Sometime too hot, the eye of heaven shines. Well, what on earth is the eye of heaven? A great time for a little chat on personification. And what is in the sky? What is hot that is in the sky that looks like an eye? Oh gosh, it's the sun. Sometimes the sun is too hot, especially if you live in Arizona. And often is his gold complexion dimmed. Sometimes it's not a nice, sunshiny, warm, and beautiful day. Sometimes the sun goes behind a cloud and we're left with one of those sort of gray, yucky, muggy days that's just plain hot and ugly. And every fair from fair sometime declines. Time for another vocab word. What does fair mean in this context? Some people will say, well, if you have a pizza cut into 10 pieces and you each get 5 pieces, that's fair. Another student might say, hey, that's where they have carnival rides and you buy and sell cattle. But of course, in this context, fair means beautiful. Fair from fair declines. Beauty goes away. Beauty fades. It does not last forever. By chance or nature's changing course untrimmed. Sometimes beauty fades because of chance. Sometimes there'll be a beautiful flower growing in the woods and some young fair maiden comes and picks it and puts it in her dang fool hair, and the life is cut short. Maybe a fox eats it. Maybe somebody steps on the flower. The life is cut short, or it's simply cut short by nature's changing course. It comes to an end because that is the cycle, the circle of life, Simba. That is the end of the flower's life, because that is just nature taking its course. But thy eternal summer shall not fade. Your beauty will never go away. And now Shakespeare turns it back once again to the object of his affections. And the students find it interesting. Maybe, I don't know, they're middle schoolers, who the heck knows what's going through their brains. Anyway, I find it interesting that even today, we still don't know with 100% certainty who Shakespeare wrote the sonnets to. Most historians, many Shakespearean scholars, believe that he wrote the sonnets to a young man. And of course, this gets a response from the kids where they're tittering and giggling and they find the whole thing hilarious. But you explain to them that in Shakespeare's time, this didn't necessarily mean romantic love. In Shakespeare's time, men were much more emotionally available than they are today. Today, men are raised and conditioned by society to be strong and silent and guarded with their feelings, and we're certainly not going to show our feelings, express our emotions to another man, because that may compromise our alpha maleness that makes us inherently men. But in Shakespeare's time, once again, men were much more open emotionally. Men were much more affectionate, perhaps, than they are today, without there necessarily being these societal tags and stigmas attached to them. It was just life as normal, and it didn't necessarily have to mean something the way it does today. But back to the sonnet, thy eternal summer shall not fade. The beauty that is you, the summer that lives, the radiance that lives within inside of you will never ever go away in my eyes. Nor lose possession of the fair thou owest. Everybody has to pay the toll man at some point. Everybody's beauty is taken away by the passage of time, but not the object of Shakespeare's affections. The beauty that they possess will never change, even as the years may take away their physical beauty. Nor shall death brag, thou wanderest in his shade. More personification. Death bragging, his shade. You can explain to the students that wanderest is just a fancy way of saying wander, which is basically just a fancy way of saying walk. So death cannot claim you. You will not fall under death's shadow. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, you will be beautiful forever, because even after you die, your beauty will live on. Well, why is that? That's answered in the very next line. When in eternal lines to time thou growest. Well, what on earth are eternal lines? Is that the line that's wrapping around the movie theater to get into Avengers Part 19? Is it the line to get into heaven? What lines are we talking about? Well, it's the lines of the sonnet, obviously. When in eternal lines to time thou growest, your beauty will grow over time. This suggests that he may even continue to write more sonnets about this recipient of his affections, even after this poem. When in eternal lines to time thou growest implies that there may be more to come. But at any rate, your beauty will grow in these lines to time. As time passes, as more people read them, your beauty will only grow stronger. And then the whole thing is brought to a beautiful conclusion, as all Shakespearean sonnets are, in the final rhyming couplet. So long as men can breathe and eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. So long as there are people on the earth with eyeballs in their face and breath in their lungs who can read the lines of this poem, then your beauty will live forever and you will never, ever die. This is such a beautiful sonnet, and it is a great place to start with students who have never experienced Shakespeare before. One of the things I really like about using this sonnet is it leaves itself open to interpretation. I mean, the interesting thing about this sonnet is it could be just as applicable to a 5-year-old child as a 95-year-old person on their deathbed. This is something you're writing someone who's dying and who you want to remind will live on forever in your estimation. It doesn't necessarily have to be written to a lover or a romantic interest. And so it's a great jumping off place to lead into a discussion of who do you think this sonnet was written for? Who could this sonnet be written for? Have your students use their imaginations and come up with different scenarios of different types of people that this sonnet could have been penned for. At the end of the day, Shakespeare is only as intimidating as your perception allows him to be. And so by starting a dialogue with your students and by taking something self-contained like the sonnets and showing your students that it's not that difficult to tackle when you really just sit down and look at it, I think you're opening up a world to them that may have previously been unavailable. Hey, I hope you got something out of this video. If you found value in it, do me a favor and smash that like button. And please stay tuned. There will be more to come in the Fool's Guide to Shakespeare series. So smash that like button, hit the notification bell, subscribe to my channel if you're enjoying my videos, and I will keep them coming. Be well out there, stay safe, take care of yourselves, and take care of someone else. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.